Hello guys and welcome back to Fat Boss TV. Today we have another boss preview for you guys. From the Tomb of Sargeras, we have Demonic Inquisition.
Yes, this is a single phase encounter that you'll probably be doing second in the instance, and you'll be fighting two bosses and they have a shared health pool. And the idea behind this encounter is that throughout the fight you'll become more and more tormented, and you'll need to confess your sins by jumping into the cage on the back of one of the bosses. So yeah, it's a little bit strange.
Now before we jump into the boss, just keep in mind that this is a preview of the encounter. All the footage you see on screen right now is from the PTR, so the boss visuals and even the abilities may change before it is released, and expect a full guide as soon as Tomb of Sargeras hits live servers. Let's jump in, and let's talk about how the Torment works.
Now, Torment is shown through a bar that appears at the bottom of the screen. Once this bar reaches 100%, you'll gain a debuff called Unbearable Torment. This will make you deal less damage, do less healing, reduce your hit chance by an absolute ton, and increases all the damage you take by 90%, so you pretty much become useless when you have this on you. You'll be gaining Torment via the boss's abilities. Some of these are avoidable, but some of them aren't. We'll be going through these in a moment. The only way you can remove Torment from you is by using your extra action button. This will teleport you inside a new room and drop you down where you'll be fighting a tormented soul ad. This ad will just melee whoever has threat, and it will occasionally spawn a bunch of green swirly circles which deal damage to you if you stand within them. The main thing that you need to know about this ad is that as you deal damage to him, he'll be spawning these orbs. Picking up one of these orbs will remove around 35 torment from you, and once you reach 0 torment, you can reuse the extra action button, and this will return you back to the main encounter area. So the idea is that when you have high torment, you want to use the extra action button to go inside, you want to damage the ad, pick up its orbs to remove your torment, and then reuse the extra action button to return to the bosses.
So there are multiple ways of dealing with this torment mechanic. The one that we found the strongest was just to have a tank inside the entire time. There's nothing forcing him to come out, so even if he's at 0 torment, he can remain inside there, not press his extra action button, and just damage the ad while he keeps himself up. The ad doesn't hit very hard, so you don't need a healer in there, but if you wanted to spawn even more orbs, even faster, you could have some extra DPS in there if you wanted as well, and just make it so they never leave as well. And then as soon as someone does get high torment, they press the button, they pick up the orbs that you've already pre-spawned, and then they can just instantly leave afterwards. The only small problem with this strategy is that the tank on the outside eventually will need to go inside, because otherwise he's going to reach 100% torment. But this is easily fixed by just simply having everyone that's inside leave, and then go back in once the new tank has gone inside, just to prevent them from tanking the ad, otherwise you're just going to get one shot. Or instead, you can just 3-tank the encounter and just have one tank inside the entire time. We actually really like the 3-tank strat. Whether or not it'll work on live servers, I guess we'll have to find out. But let's move on and let's talk about how you actually get Torment and how the bosses work. First to know is that Atragan generally needs to be faced away from your raid, and this is the guy with all the tank-centric abilities, which generate a large amount of Torment. He has a frontal cleave called Scythe Sweep, which deals a huge amount of physical damage to everyone in front of him, which also applies 20 Torment, so when he casts this, you need to make sure he's faced away from the raid. And he also has a passive called Bone Scythe. This causes all of his melee attacks to also apply 2 Torment to the tank, and these are the 2 abilities that will force your tank to go inside. And again, when your tank is about to go inside, you need to make sure the other tank is present in order to pick up the boss so it doesn't randomly just go off and hit a DPS. Now on a timer, he'll also cast Calcified Quills. What he'll do is he'll target a player and just send a shockwave towards them that will do a huge amount of damage and also knock them up into the air. Fortunately, this ability almost always targets the tank, so as long as no one else has stood on top of the tank, it's absolutely fine. However, occasionally it will go out of range, but the majority of the time you're spread anyway, because the ability's from the other boss. So as long as it only hits one player and they're topped, it's not a big deal. And Artagan's signature ability is Bonesaw. When he casts this, he'll just spin around, dealing a large amount of damage and applying torment to anyone nearby within the animation of the spell. His movement speed at this point is severely reduced, so this does actually allow your tank just to kite him around, and everyone can completely avoid the damage. However, if anyone attacks Atragan during the Bone Storm, they'll actually gain a substantial amount of torment. So at this point, as soon as the boss casts the ability, make sure all of your DPS swap and attack Belak instead. Any dots that you have left on Atragan don't appear to apply any torment, however cleave effects such as Barrage or Swipe will give you torment. So because of this, the kiting tank, make sure you're kiting the boss in the opposite direction, not towards Belak.
Speaking of Belak, let's jump in and talk about him. Now, he has multiple mechanics that the entire raid needs to deal with. He also cannot be moved, and he does not need to be tanked. Now, you'll need to have an interrupt rotation for him to deal with his Pangs of Guilt. This will not apply any torment to anyone, but it will do a huge burst of damage to the entire raid. This going off, combined with some of his other abilities, can easily insta-kill a player. So generally speaking, you want to have a 3-player interrupt rotation. This is normally enough to cover every single cast. However, all players are likely to need to go inside to drop their Torment at one point or another during the fight, and when you are inside the cage, you are out of range of Belak and you cannot interrupt him. So you need to make sure that if any of your interrupters do go down, you have some backups available to make sure this ability does not go off. Now, ranged players need to be spread for his Suffocating Dark ability. This will immediately place a Void Zone on 3 ranged players, and these Void Zones will slow you, deal a large amount of ticking damage to you, and also apply 8 Torment to you every second. So you need to move out of these immediately just to reduce the amount of damage and torment that you're taking, but you also want to avoid standing near the entrance of the room. This is because players leaving the torment cage always spawn on a single spot at the entrance of the room, and you do not want them to land straight into a Void Zone. Being spread also helps deal with the Echoing Anguish. This is a debuff which deals ticking damage and applies 2 torment every second for 12 seconds. When this times out or it is dispelled, the debuff will explode, dealing a large amount of damage and applying 10 torment to anyone within 8 yards. So you need to make sure that when you have the debuff on you, you move away and then you get dispelled. This can also target melee players, so you can't just be tunneling into the boss the entire time. You need to keep an eye out on your debuffs. Now, you do need to be careful when you are going to dispel this debuff because it may happen roughly around the same time as a Tormenting Burst. This is a cast that would just do a flat burst amount of damage to the entire raid, and it also applies 8 Torment to everyone. This is completely unavoidable, you can't interrupt it or anything, and of course if you combo this with any other sources of damage, it can easily be lethal. And this is one of the reasons that everyone has to go in eventually, because this is one of the unavoidable sources of Torment that you'll be gaining. Now, much like Atragan, on a lengthy timer, the boss will be casting Fell Squall. This ability functions pretty much the same way as Atragan's Bonesaw. Belak will just be dealing ticking damage and applying torment to anyone nearby, and if you attack him during this time, you'll be gaining additional torment. So you want all DPS to switch over to Atragan before this ability comes in, just to make sure you don't get any additional torment. As soon as the Fell Squall is over, you need to make sure that you have your interrupters ready to switch back to Belak to make sure that none of the pangs of guilt go through. So that's the fight. So let's leave some feedback. Overall, I do like the idea of the fight, like the whole idea of Torment. It kind of changes how every single pull is going to be because the Torment's kind of applied somewhat randomly across your raid.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, oh, okay, these 3 people are going in first and then these people are going in afterwards, because it's going to change every single pull. It's kind of like Mythic Knife Ender a little bit. So it kind of keeps the fight fresh while you're kind of progressing on it.
Sure.
But the one thing I did definitely find while I was playing through it was that the cage is just very dull. Nothing really happens in the cage.
Yeah, so there's not really much that can really kill you inside the cage as long as there's the tank actually tanking the ad. There's nothing else to do apart from damage it and just spawn orbs while avoiding the little circles that appear on the ground that don't really do anything anyway. I think they really should change how the inside works before it does hit live servers. I guess it could be pretty interesting if you maybe had like a stacking dot inside there, which, you know, eventually gets to the stage where it just flat out one-shots you, so you can't have people in there the entire time. I think that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it would definitely change how you do the fight, because right now you just leave the tank in there and then it's like, oh, I have Torment. Jump in, gather the tank orbs, and then just leave again, and that poor tank is just in there the entire time. Whereas if the tank had to leave more frequently, then you'd have to be sending in groups of people. So you'd have to send the 1 tank, 1 healer, and a couple of high Torment DPS. So that way, once again, you're having to make groups on the fly when you're going through the encounter. And I think that's probably the intended way of doing the fight, but right now you can completely cheese it. But moving away from the cage for a second, with the bosses on the outside, although they do have quite a few abilities, none of them are really that exciting. Like, normally with bosses, you have like 1 or 2 abilities that maybe interact with each other, or the abilities are really cool and impactful and you have to, you know, really work around them. Whereas with this fight, it seems more like, you know, they have like 8 or 9 abilities that are kind of just there, rather than maybe 4 or 5 good abilities.
I mean, there are some abilities that are, you know, are devastating. As an example, if you miss an interrupt and then the boss does his AoE on top of that, that is pretty much going to wipe your entire raids. You know, that's something to watch out for. But there is definitely no signature ability. Just making it so you need to have a solid interrupt rotation does not make a boss fun. And the signature abilities, if you're going to call them that in this encounter, is probably going to be what the Fell Squall and the Bonesaw.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have the longest timer and look like they have the most impact. Where in reality, all you need to do is just stop attacking them and make sure you're not in melee range. That doesn't really seem like, you know, abilities that really stand out. And instead, maybe it would be better if they, like, maybe trimmed down the amount of abilities and just made them a little bit more impactful. Kind of like Goroth, you know? With Goroth, he has very few spells, but everything that he does is important. With these bosses, it's not really so much the case. It's just be spread, dispel, make sure you interrupt, go inside when you have high torment, make sure that you always have a tank on the outside. That's it.
Yeah, 100%, but I don't really think it's the boss's fault necessarily. more that it's kind of where the boss is placed within the instance. Because it's only, like, you're going to be killing this second or third. They can't make a boss too difficult. It's like they made this boss for a later part of the instance and then realized, oh crap, it's actually supposed to be for an earlier part. So they kind of just trimmed down on how vicious the abilities are or how impactful they are. Because, of course, an early boss shouldn't be difficult. I'm not saying that. But this boss seems to have so much potential. And when it isn't realizing its potential like it is right now, it's definitely there is something missing. And I think you're right. I think something in the cage needs to be, like, more of an important factor. And you shouldn't just be able to cheese it.
With all of that said, I mean, we're being maybe a little bit too negative.
Yeah, we probably are.
It's not a terrible boss. It really isn't a terrible boss. Everything seems to be working exactly how they wanted it to work. And, you know, you can't just be done with it. You can't just pull the boss and you're instantly going to kill it. You do need to be careful. There's a lot of room to min-max, you know, exactly where you put in the void zones. There's a lot of master spell strategies you could do with those debuffs, as well as trying to make sure that you have high uptime on both bosses by putting them close together so you can maximize the amount of cleave without actually dealing damage to them during Fell Score and the Bone Storm.
Yeah.
And to add on top of that, all the other abilities that are in play do come in frequently. So it's not like you're standing there scratching your balls waiting for something to happen. There is shit that is actually going on. And to add to that, the fight is taking a slightly different tone on Mythic, because each time you do leave the cage, you'll actually spawn an ad, and you need to kite it around, otherwise it just goes around and one-shots people. And this spawns every single time someone leaves. So although on normal and heroic and an LFR or whatever, you can go in there as many times as you want, on Mythic, it's something that you will actually need to min-max.
Yeah, you want to really minimize the amount of time you want to go in the cage. And maybe that's something maybe the fight needs. Maybe we're kind of looking at it from a Mythic point of view, and it's probably fine how it is. But yeah, I think that addition to it should definitely make it a bit more challenging and a bit more fun overall.
But anyway, guys, that's all we got time for in this video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this little preview, then make sure you drop us down a like. And before we do end the video, we'd like to give a huge shout out to all of our supporters over on Patreon. We really do appreciate it. You guys are absolutely fantastic. And we shall see you all in the next boss preview.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.